It's emerging. Do you hear it?
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, lift
Do you
off.
feel it?
Houston now controlling and liftoff of Discovery.
Technology. The trustworthy journalism required to make technology a greater force for good is here. It's always been, and it has barely begun.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Charlotte G. I'm the news editor of MIT Technology Review, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Will Douglas-Heaven, who is our senior AI editor, and also by James O'Donnell, our AI reporter.
Hi.
Hi, happy to be here.
So our goal over the next 30 minutes is to give you an overview of what we expect to happen in the world of AI this year. And as we go, we'll be answering your questions. So if you have them, please put them in the chat window, and I promise I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. And we'd also love to hear your predictions. I'm sure many of you may work in the world of AI. So what do you think is coming around the corner? Tell us. We just published a piece called What's Next for AI in 2025, which obviously you should all read that. But if you haven't, we'll give you a quick preview in this session today, as well as talking about some things that didn't make the cut. The first one, which I'd like to highlight, is the way that AI is being used to speed up scientific discovery. Now, last October, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to some top names in this field, including Demis Hassabis, Google DeepMind CEO, who helped to pioneer the AlphaFold tool. It's really good to see AI being acknowledged this way, because the potential for AI to speed up and enhance scientific discovery is very real and is very exciting. And these sorts of discoveries could help us better understand what drives and changes cells' behavior. And that could help us to make better treatments for all sorts of diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. So AI could also help us find, new materials. It's already improving the way we forecast the weather. So all sorts of things feel possible over the next year. It's clear that when it is applied, thoughtfully, AI can be a kind of really smart analyst and assistant for researchers. So that's an area that I'm excited about, and I'm going to watch this year closely. Will, you've written about this topic loads of times. Do you think we're going to hit any milestones this year? Any predictions?
Yeah, I mean, science is a funny one. It's much harder to predict discoveries in science than it is perhaps to sort of predict the increments in technology itself. But you're absolutely right that there has been a lot of groundwork laid by a lot of big labs with a lot of resources, data sets in material science, in biology. So with the groundwork there, then sure, I think this is definitely an area we need to watch. I'd also highlight, you talked about treatments. There's more than 24 drugs now that have been designed with the help of AI that are going through clinical trials. I mean, those are notoriously slow. They can take years. So again, I wouldn't put money on seeing, the first drug on the market this year, but who knows? And also math is an area to watch now. I mean, a lot of the latest large language models, have been hitting, benchmarks we haven't seen before, and how well they can do maths in doing math Olympiad problems. And I've also spoken to mathematicians, sort of research level mathematicians, who are excited about the impact that AI could have on sort of solving some of the grand open math challenges.
Yeah, it feels like that's one of those areas where we keep seeing kind of the barrier being pushed further and further and further in the kind of field of math. Are there other areas that you predict will see breakthroughs, or at least incremental improvements over the next year?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a little bit of this at the end of last year, but one area that I think is really pushing a new frontier is so-called reasoning. Now, that's a word that a few months ago I struggled to say in relation to AI. We've written a lot about why sort of anthropomorphizing what AI actually does is problematic, but think of reasoning as a new piece of sort of technical jargon that describes a type of large language model that sort of steps through problems bit by bit, breaks down a task you give it into smaller problems, makes them more manageable, makes them more accurate. It also allows a model to sort of backtrack. If it's trying to do something and it hits a wall, it can go back and sort of try and tackle one of those smaller tasks again. So one of the prime examples of these reasoning models is OpenAI's O1 and now O3. They skipped O2 because it's also the name of a mobile carrier. But those two models have really hit out of the park many of the yardsticks that people were using to sort of measure how good large language models can be, particularly, and this relates back to what we were saying about science, particularly in so-called STEM subjects, in science, technology, math, physics, logic. They're particularly good at those kind of problems. And that's also related to agents, which I will probably come on to in a bit. But agents are things you need to give instructions to, expect them to go off on their own. An agent that can do that by sort of reasoning through the steps that it needs to do will obviously have more success.
Yeah, while we're on this topic, I was going to ask this a bit later on, but I think this sort of follows so perfectly from what you're saying. I mean, you must have all the time people saying to you, is super intelligent AI going to take over the world? And this is something that we've really seen industry figures kind of hyping up. I mean, Sam Altman has sort of said, we're going to have AGI just around the corner. It's coming any day now. What's going on with that? Should we be? People constantly say, "Oh, should I be worried?" Or assume that they should. Should they? When are we going to get AGI? Is that coming this year?
No. No, it's not coming this year. Well, it depends what you mean by AGI. So, I think Sam Altman is a hilarious example of this. We've heard so much about AGI, which until recently meant an AI that could do most, if not all, sort of at least cognitive tasks that a person can, as well as that person, if not better. I mean, which is a mind-boggling range of abilities. And this was always like it has been for decades, a tip of the wish list of what we are building these machines to do. And so if you wanted to, kick up a lot of hype around your company or around technology, then you would say, yeah, we're building towards AGI. Now, of course, these companies have been making these claims for a few years, and they need to sort of make good on them. So we have people like Sam Altman saying this is the year that AGI is going to appear. But what he now means by AGI is far more mundane than what he was talking about a few years ago. I think in the blog post, which I think you're referencing, he put out a few days ago, and he said he thinks AGI is going to come this year. He means agents, which is again sort of quite a vague term. Agents may be able to contribute to the workplace. So if he simply means an AI that can do a few workplace tasks, then sure, AGI may appear this year. But that is certainly not what most people in this industry have meant by AGI for a very long time. Whether AGI will ever appear, again, splits the field. I have doubts that a technology that can match humans in everything will ever exist. But a lot of people may disagree.
Yeah, well, as we know in tech, if you don't hit the goalpost, then you can just keep trying to move them slightly. But is there anything else that you predict happening the next year? Anything on the slightly more optimistic and less fuzzy scale, I wonder?
So another thing I put in the list was, this goes under various names, but I call them sort of virtual worlds, or it probably helps people just think of sort of video game environments. So 2 years ago we saw breakthroughs in sort of image generation, and then last year was a big year for video generation, and I think now we're seeing the first signs of sort of virtual world generation. So imagine some of these systems you can just give a starter image to, and then it will generate a virtual world beyond that. It's like sort of stepping into a picture, into a world that you can then just explore as you work along. It's sort of generated as you go. Obviously that's a really tantalizing idea for games, at least for sort of prototyping games and game environments. But some of the companies working on this, and Google is one. There's another one set up by Fei-Fei Li, who is a pioneer from the early days of deep learning a decade plus ago, called World Labs. And the virtual environments that they are generating, they hope to use to train robots. And there's another buzzword that people might be interested in sort of picking up, hearing here first, which is spatial intelligence. Is another new frontier for these AI systems to try and to understand the environment they're working in, whether that's a robot in a warehouse, or an agent in a virtual world. But if you have these sort of training environments that you can spin up on the fly, then it gives you a lot more scope to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Definitely an area to keep a close eye on. James, what about you? What's on your bingo card for 2025?
Yeah, one thing I wrote about for our story was just the fact that I think the taboo that AI companies have had in the past about working with the defense industry, national security, things like that, I think that taboo is starting to fade, and I think it will continue to fade this year. So we saw late last year, OpenAI sort of reversed its stance on working with the military, which it had basically from its founding. It said, we're not going to use our AI technologies to work with militaries, develop weapons, things like that. They've kept some specific pieces of that promise to not directly create weapons, but they've broadened sort of what they allow themselves to do with their technology. So specifically, they've partnered with a defense company called Anduril. They've agreed to let their models basically better help detect drones in the sky at U.S. and allied bases, algorithms that can basically quickly detect drones and then direct forces to take those drones down. So that's sort of AI happening out in the physical world, in the world of military. And then there's also sort of the more cognitive side of things. So there's some interesting work going on that Anduril and Palantir are taking on to basically take classified information. The U.S. government and others create trillions of documents of classified information and data, and until now that has sort of been very contained on its own. And now there are ways that they're developing to actually build AI models that are trained on that classified data, and in theory can at least retain that securely. So I think there's going to be both AI continuing to be out on the physical battlefield, and drones developments that we've seen since the invasion of Ukraine, especially, but also on the more cognitive AI side of things. And I think one of the forces affecting that is just the fact that creating AI models, training them, fine-tuning them is extraordinarily expensive. It requires a ton of energy, ton of labor, and I think there's going to be increasing pressure over some time frame for these AI companies to turn some sort of profit. Every venture capitalist and investor has a different appetite for that risk and how long they're willing to wait for that. But eventually, it's likely these AI companies are going to have some pressure to sort of make a move and turn a profit. And it will be, if they do face that pressure, it'll be harder and harder for them to turn down contracts with the military and with defense sectors on some, moral ground. I think that's likely to keep reversing.
Interesting. It makes sense. I mean, if you're looking for a giant pot of money, the Pentagon certainly qualifies. James, I wonder if you can talk a bit about, we've sort of alluded to this slightly earlier, but if you could talk about agents, because now we didn't put agents on this list, which maybe that's controversial. I don't really know. I'd really love to know, was that a deliberate decision? And if so, what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, and for anybody, Will just talked about this a little bit, but for anybody who's unfamiliar with the term, by AI agent, the industry means something that can actually go out and do something for you on your behalf. So not just a GPT that can speak with you, but can actually go off and solve a problem for you. So you give it permissions to go do something, and we can talk about the extent to which you want to give up your private data and permissions to your computer and things like that to allow an agent to go do that. The reason we didn't put it on the list is because a lot of people are talking about it. It's a lot more sort of in the news and familiar to most people than it was a year ago. And we felt like, regardless, people know about this, it's happening. And this list for us was to try and dig a little bit deeper and see, what are some trends in AI that might be a little bit more surprising to people. But it's interesting just to note, like, the idea of an AI agent has been, maybe not an AI agent, but let's say the idea of an agent has been around for decades, like since the 90s, the idea that you could have some software, go out and do things for you on your behalf. What's new now is the idea that AI allows two different agents to sort of talk to each other in natural language in a way that wasn't really possible in the 90s, certainly. So what's interesting to me is that, as Will said, the first wave of that is going to be for businesses. Maybe you have an AI agent that can code things for you and, make decisions across different pieces of software, which will happen at some point. The more interesting thing for us to think about is when that will hit consumers, if ever, and when you would be willing to sort of give your credit card over to this AI agent that promises to find deals for you and get better flights or something, but in exchange you need to give up some of your information and trust that this thing is not going to make terrible decisions for you. So that's maybe this year, but is probably a little bit later.
Yeah. Will, what do you think in terms of agents and the time horizon for when some of these capabilities are actually going to land?
Yeah, I think it'll be sort of, a slow burn. We'll see the trickle of agents that can do some basic things. I mean, the people already, calling what they're making agents. Just if you've got, well, here's one example, quite a fun example. I spoke to a company that was using AI to translate Japanese manga comics into English. And they talk about using agents simply because they have a pipeline with several different tasks that they need to do, each task controlled by AI. And they have a sort of an agent architecture that kind of lets each bit of that pipeline talk to each other. So, we already have agents that, are more consumer focused, that you can go off and do our shopping for us or pay our bills or plan our holidays. Yeah, exactly as James said, I think that will sort of depend on how comfortable people are with that kind of, technology, actually having access to a lot of private information. But I mean, the other thing I think it is worth noting is that there's no coincidence that everyone's talking about agents. I mean, it's because the top tier large language models between these rival companies, the gains between them are getting marginal. I mean, they're all really, really good. And I think now the question on everyone's lips is, okay, what can I actually do with it? And that's where agents come in. So we're waiting to see what the sort of the killer app is going to be.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I wonder, actually, do you know what? I'm going to take a question because I can see that I'm stacking some up here. I'm going to go to James with this one. I think you've written about this a bit before. It's a question from Poolkit, and it is, will AI-powered tutoring systems become mainstream in schools and universities? He's written by 2025, maybe in 2025, over the next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to say to the extent that they may already be quite mainstream. There's a lot of different options for both students and teachers to use. When ChatGPT first came on the scene, it was sort of like, how do we keep the students from using this for cheating and, basically skipping their homework? And that's still a concern for a lot of teachers. But I think what I'm seeing more is a conversation about how to use this to sort of do individual tailored learning. So the AI as a sort of tutor, like the question asker is saying, that exists. To the extent that it's going to be required in schools, I'm not really sure. And to be honest, I haven't seen a ton of evidence of sort of or academic, literature evidence, let's say, of the effectiveness of that. But it is definitely getting more and more common for schools to think about the ways that they can bring AI into the classroom in a way that's not just how do we tamp this down and keep kids from using it, but actually, maybe is there something here that we could, leverage as a possible tutor. So that's something I'll be watching this year for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if that taps slightly into a kind of trend of AI coming a bit more into the foreground, where I suspect there's massive amounts of AI usage going on, below the hood in parts of different businesses and maybe even in schools, and perhaps that will become a bit more visible. I don't know, or maybe the opposite. I mean, Will, I wonder as well, one thing that would make it very tangible is if we had an AI device or some kind of wearable or a thing that wasn't just our phones. There's been loads of kind of attention poured into this, and companies like Humane with their AI pin, which hasn't hasn't been a success, safe to say. None of these are breaking through. So why do people still keep talking about them and trying to work on them? What's going on? What's going on there?
I don't know for sure. I mean, my guess is that, what's next after our phones is something that I think a lot of, startups would love to answer, right? And so that's why I think we've seen people think, AI is this hot new thing. Let's make a device that's sort of AI specific and people will jump on it. But we've seen some terrible failures of that. And I think it's not necessarily because the AI doesn't work very well. It's because people don't really want anything other than their phones at the moment. And I think the AI device that we're going to see will be our phones, like with AI powered apps. I got a demo of this app that Google DeepMind is working on called Astra, which is sort of like an everything app. You hold your phone up with the video on, and you can point it at anything you come across, and you talk to your phone about it and ask it questions and get it to go off and do stuff. This bottle of wine, what kind of food does it go for? Oh, there's a bus going by. Where does that bus go? Sort of, that's the kind of, on-person wearable that I think we're going to see, but it's still just a phone.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen all kinds of things. We've seen like pendants, one that you can strap to your head. I mean, James, would you wear your AI assistant? What's your view on this?
No, I think a lot of people are overwhelmed as it is with their phone being capable of so much that I don't think most people want to add another piece of hardware to their lives that they need to keep track of. And I think, the core strength of AI right now is especially in voice mode, let's say. So like, sure, you can type on GPT and it's pretty good. Voice mode is really interesting. It takes definitely a little bit of, it's like embarrassing to use at first, I would say. It just feels clunky and funny to be talking to this thing. And I know that I at least really don't do it in front of my friends, and maybe other people don't either. But you can find a lot of use out of this if you're comfortable sort of getting over the hurdle of having conversations with an AI. But that said, your phone has decades of engineering and progress behind it to make it the most powerful thing that could ever fit in your pocket, that I don't think most people are going to be willing to take a bet on some new piece of hardware that they're going to pin to their shirt, or definitely not their face. So I'm not optimistic about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic we could get into, like people's reluctance to attach tech to their faces. But Will, so it's not going to be an AI device, probably. So what is the next frontier for AI? Where are we? Where do you think we're going to find something in the next year or two that's going to kind of wow us beyond like text, language? Where are things going next?
I mean, I think it'll be back to what we were talking about with agents. I would watch reasoning. I think we're going to see, reasoning get better, but I think even there it's tailing off. I think, there's this idea of a sort of technology overhang, which means kind of the technology has got really, really good, and we're trying to catch up to figure out what we can do with it. I think this year and for some years to come, we're going to see applications of technology rather than big breakthroughs. I mean, I'm going to eat my hat when I'm proved wrong, but that's the sort of the sign that we're getting from. We've sort of seen this burst of progress around large language models. It's not that they're hitting a wall. I mean, they're still improving, and there's still loads of low-hanging fruit there. But rather than sort of already saying, okay, we've seen that trick, what's next? I think we want to see the fruits of this technology developed further.
Yeah. And James, I wonder if you can talk a bit about what factors are holding back progress in AI? Are there sort of, what are the different elements that are actually stopping some progress that could be made otherwise?
Yeah, I think, the great thing that gets fed into AI models, whether it's for text or images or whatever, is data, right? Like it's only can learn as much as it's, exposed to. And I think people are getting creative about how to feed new types of data into AI models. For a while, it was, the internet was big enough that you could train an AI model on. Increasingly, that's not the case. for anyone who subscribes to the algorithm on Monday, this is going to be about the role of data in AI cancer detection, like why it's actually quite hard to use AI models that analyze images of tissues and things to detect cancer automatically, because we simply just don't have great catalogs of data of what that looks like. So that's a limiting factor there. And I think Will mentioned this earlier, but one thing we'll certainly see is AI companies basically creating synthetic data. So we see that a lot with robots, for sure, where you're not just driving a self-driving car on real roads, you're doing it in simulation, and then you're basically using models to create training data that you can then use to train your AI models to be more powerful, which is sort of like learning from the world, but also learning from your own imagination. It's a little bit of a strange concept, and there's definitely some risks to training on synthetic invented data. But the one thing I definitely want to flag is just that something that should be holding AI back, or at least giving us pause, is just the environmental burden of all of this, right? And we don't have a lot of great transparency or data from the leading AI companies, like what the associated emissions are for all of this. There's a handful of companies who are creating these leading models, and it's hard for us to sort of parse out and differentiate the emissions that have come from this surge in AI, especially with something like with search, which we've done some really interesting articles in the past few weeks about how the way that we search and find information on the internet is going from a simple Google search to like AI overviews and getting even more complicated than that. And there are some hard questions we should ask along the way of just like, how much more in emissions are we willing to accept for something that's like a marginally better answer that we get from AI, or even sometimes a marginally worse answer. So that's something that I think we'll definitely be following this year as well, for sure.
Yeah, it's that kind of just because we can doesn't mean that we should. I mean, Will, I wonder, like we've got people kind of touching on this in the chat and asking questions. I mean, do you think that we're going to see a bit more of a thoughtful application of AI this year, or do you think it's still just like move fast, break things, throw everything at the wall?
I think it'll be move fast, break things. I mean, there's a lot of good work being done around responsible development of AI, but that's not new. I mean, there've been really strong efforts on that front for a number of years, and yet we still sort of doesn't seem to be hampering progress at all, and there's still sort of AI being developed that has problems. I guess to be charitable, that the message has got through, and within a lot of the top tech labs, there are some people who take the problems with AI very seriously and try to make AI that is that is harm-free as it can be. But in terms of will there be regulations, certainly in the US, that restrain these companies? I don't expect to see it. Not with the administration that's coming in. In Europe, perhaps, but there's always been a big divide between Europe and the US. But any regulation that comes in Europe maybe won't have that big an effect on the US companies anyway.
And before we close, maybe Charlotte, it'd be fun to turn it back to you and just ask you what you're expecting to see this year. Any predictions that you want to share?
I do have one. The main one, I think, for me is that I think we're going to see people forming deeper bonds with AI and kind of relationships with AI. Because like you were saying with the voice mode, AI is feeling more and more real these days, and it kind of talks to us, and it feels like it empathizes with us. It can laugh at our jokes, which is more than I can say for some of my friends. But it just generally, it gives us a lot more back. And I think that it's going to become more and more compelling as aspects like its ability to remember things improve. And I've spoken to a whole bunch of people who use AI for this purpose, and who talk to AI about how they feel day to day. And honestly, it's kind of crazy how quickly AI is being adopted for that purpose. Again, I think it's one of those trends that's for now still quite below the surface, but I think we'll see that bursting open a bit more over the next year. And for what it's worth, I think that's mostly benign, for the majority of people. Maybe it's even beneficial, but I think we are starting to see that there is a subset of at-risk users out there, And I think the dangers over the next year are going to become clearer to those people, because, you know, an AI that never challenges you or calls you out could be really addictive, especially if, you know, if you're quite lonely or isolated. But the group I'm most worried about is teenagers, many of whom are dealing with, you know, mental health issues post-pandemic, don't necessarily fully understand the limitations of what they're dealing with, and or maybe the data privacy aspect. But, you know, that's like a whole minefield. But that said, I mean, I'm still chatting to AI about personal stuff every now and then, because it's just too compelling to resist. And yeah, I mean, James, you've also been using AI for chat purposes recently. Do you have any examples you're willing to share with us?
Yeah, again, initially I felt totally weird doing voice mode with GPT on my phone, and then sometimes, so I read a lot of nonfiction, both for work and for not work, and it can be helpful to just have this thing going that you can, you know, ask a question to, have a conversation with something that you're confused about. You know, even with the skepticism that I know it hallucinates and gets plenty of things wrong, and I know that very deeply from what I report on. There's a fluidity of having that conversation that is just not the same as going to Google something. So yeah, I've grown used to using it more and more.
Yeah, well, I'm just glad it's not, you know, only me. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. There's so much more that we could talk about, and we will be talking about it at our MTech AI event in May. So please do come along and join us. As a special thank you for coming today, we're going to email all of you a special discount code to register. It's worth doing that for the next price increase at the end of the month. So yeah, please do consider joining us. I know that James will be there, so you can go and say hi to him. So yeah, all that remains to say is thank you so much from me, from Will, from James, everyone on the MIT Technology Review team. We hope you enjoyed the session as much as we did, and goodbye.